Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome. I told Judge Judy she was going to love the 92nd Street Y, and the Y was going to love her right back. She's never actually done an interview here, so welcome.
Thank you.
So good to have you. We have so much to talk about and so much to get through, so let me just start right away. I know that you live obviously in California where you do your show, and also in Florida when you're not taping, but you have roots, not surprisingly, as I think we saw in that tape, right here in New York City and Brooklyn. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Brooklyn and how New York has really made you the person you are today.
I think that growing up back in the Stone Age, when I lived on Ocean Avenue between S&T and the Flatbush, Sheepshead Bay area of Brooklyn, there was a wonderful sense of community. You know, we all went to temple together on the high holy days, got all dressed up, never went inside. But we got all dressed up and walked around the block and, you know, tried to make a social connection at age 12 or 13. And of course, I remember going to shul to visit with my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who was a very pious Jew on the high holy days. 364 days a year, he was one of the worst ganefs in Brooklyn. He had an appliance store. This is actually a cute story. And then I'll get back to your question.
Don't worry.
Remind me.
Don't worry. I realize I'm going to ask about 2 questions tonight, so don't worry.
My grandfather had an appliance store in Brooklyn. And, you know, he was always involved in some little shady transaction or another. And I sort of knew this as a child because they sent me to work with him when I was 9 on Saturday. I would answer the phone and I would yell in, "Mr. S," their last name was Silverman. And I could tell that there were certain things that he did that I didn't think was strictly kosher. And then came Yom Kippur. And they lived on the 7th floor of an apartment building. And my grandfather would not take the elevator. So I questioned as to why, and they said, well, on the high holy days, you neither take the elevator, you don't eat, you don't. And I said, but you know, 363, 64 days, he's like this. They said, well, this is the Day of Atonement. So I figured out at a very young age that if I was good all year, I could take the elevator. How did growing up in New York affect me? Well, I think that there was a certain Brooklyn Jewish humor and a sense of comedic timing that has really not been replaced now. I mean, I think that some of the comedians today are absolutely fabulous, but I think that the old style Borscht Belt comedians, the self-deprecating, you know, poking fun at the family, but I grew up with that. And I grew up with a father who was a dentist. And a dentist...
Oh, there's a dentist in the crowd.
Dentists have captive audiences, so they can either tell a good story to keep you interested and keep the clientele coming back or not. So my father had a very good sense of comedic timing. And I like to think of some of the attributes, some of the wonderful attributes that I like to feel as if I inherited from him, or at least a little piece of them. The one thing he gave me that has stood me in good stead all these years is the comedic timing. That's what separates Brooklyn from not.
And what about your mom, Judy? How did she influence you?
My mom was underappreciated. It's sort of interesting. My father was the star, but my mother made sure everything got done. And it wasn't until after she passed away, when she was quite young, that I recognized that this father of mine, whom I idolized and still do, really was made to look like a king, because he had someone so solid that took care of all the minutiae. You know, but remember the birthdays, remember the anniversaries, made sure the presents were right, made sure the cards were right, gave him the cards to sign, all those things that made it all fit together seamlessly. Because when my mother died, my father didn't know where the bank was. He found out. But it's true, you know, I sort of undervalued her during her life. It's not until you get older that you realize that that's what you need to keep a family together, you know, somebody who sort of takes care of all that stuff. That's what my mother did for me.
So when you were a little girl, Judith Bloom,
Yes.
Growing up in Brooklyn, what were your dreams? Did you have any aspirations about what you would do or what you would be when you grew up?
I knew I wanted to be out of Brooklyn in Manhattan. That was the big time.
Yeah.
And my first husband was from Queens. That was moving up when you were from Brooklyn. So that was my first dream. As a matter of fact, I told somebody a story. You don't mind if we digress for a moment?
No, go
you know,
for it.
You'll only get
Oh,
through
sister,
a few
go
of these
for it.
parts.
Go for it.
These are actually some stories that some of you haven't heard before that I would not bear repeating unless we were a small, intimate group. But when my first husband and I married, he, of course, wanted to live in Queens close to his mother. I said, if we're going to live close to somebody's mother, it's going to be my mother. We're going to live in Brooklyn. And he said, you know, I mean, I'm from Queens. Who gets married and moves to Brooklyn? You don't, that doesn't happen. That's not the geographical migration of Jews. You know, that doesn't. So I was in law school at the time. I was in my second year of law school. And we were going to be married. And how was I going to do this, negotiate this without much of a fight? Because in reality, he was right. The migratory pattern was from Brooklyn to Queens, Manhattan, if you were lucky, or the 5 towns. That was where it was at. So I said to him, I just got a job after law school working for a doctor in Brooklyn, which I did. I got a job working for an internist in Brooklyn, and my job was to give people cardiograms. But in those years, now it's easy, you know, everything is sort of color-coded. But in those years, there was a gel, you had to put on a gel, it came out of a squeeze tube, and you had to put the lead, and you had to put the thing on, and the leads fit. I was a disaster.
Well, this was after law school?
Well, right after law school. Law school isn't until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, you know, an idiot could get past law school, actually. So I kept the job until 2 weeks after the wedding. And then I told him I was let go. By this time, we had signed a lease, moved into Webster Avenue in Brooklyn, and I got to live next.
That's a good foundation for a strong, honest relationship.
It didn't last.
Yeah. But you know, you talk about law school, and I think it's interesting to note because I think we're both feminists in our own way, in our own time. And you went to AU, and you majored in government first, but then when you went to law school, weren't you one of the first, the only woman lawyer in your only female law student in your law school class?
My first year, there was a class of 126. And I was the only woman in that class. And it's interesting, I never considered myself a feminist. All during my professional career, whether it be a lawyer or a judge, I never belonged to a woman's organization. I didn't want to be, I wasn't a woman lawyer. I was a lawyer who happened to be a woman. And I wasn't a woman judge. I was a judge who happened to be a woman. I actually never felt, probably I was too stupid to know that I was held back at any time because of my gender. And I still don't feel as if there was any time in my life when I thought that being a woman held me back except for my first job, which I'll get to if you ask me the question.
I'm just letting you go. Go ahead. I think that was a natural segue, so hit it.
My first job, and you can sue me all you like, it's a true story, was with Cosmere Incorporated, L'Oreal of Paris. And it was the first year that they were going into the retail business of selling their suffrage and nets and stuff rather than in beauty salons in drugstores. And they were hiring 2 lawyers, myself and a man. And I remember the man was a nice looking fellow, my age, And they gave him an office, and they put him immediately in charge of products liability, for people who use suffrage and, their head turned orange. Me, they gave a pad and a pencil and an order form, and it was my job to call drugstores to get their orders. That was the only time in my career that I felt as if they said, she's a lawyer, but. And that was, I think, had a very strong impact on the rest of my career, because I said, A, I'm not going to let anybody put baby in the corner. And B, you define yourself. If you let other people define you, that's a mistake. So they were a couple of good lessons, and I never felt the need to have a feminine organization behind me, although I'm sure that in some way they were assistants to me along the way.
I think it's funny, I think of feminism as the social, political, and economic equality for men and women. So, I wish people would embrace the term, because I think it's gotten a bad rap. So it's interesting for me to hear you say it's almost like you don't want to be associated with feminism.
No, because I don't think a movement, actually, Katie, helped me. I can understand that a movement is necessary to get something off the ground, perhaps. I think we needed a movement in order to get the right to vote. But I certainly don't want pay parity with most men.
You don't need it. Yeah.
So, I think you define your own world. And being part of an organization never defined me. So it's just a different way of looking at what feminism really has done to bring women along. I think that we needed organization for certain basic rights, but I think you are the master of your own destiny and can be the hero of your own story, and are only defined by the measure of how much you want to work and how much you want to get there. And nobody knows that actually better than you do. You work hard and you get the door prize. That's it.
I agree with that. Let's talk about sort of when you got your law degree, Judy, because I know in 1965 you were married, and to your first husband.
A very nice man, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm very fond of him.
And I knew you were married.
And he doesn't live in Queens, he lives in Manhattan.
And you guys had 2 children together, and at that point in time, a lot of women were not in the workforce, and I wonder, how were you able to that eternal question of work-life balance, and how were you able to have a full-time job, have 2 kids, especially in an era where I don't think people were necessarily all that receptive to the so-called working woman?
You just did it. I think that you have to be prepared to take a little bit of a pushback, not only from your job, but sometimes from your kids, and certainly from your husband, if he's not enlightened. You actually just say, this is what I need, and I'm willing to pitch in and do I'm not asking you to do any of my job. You say, to say to that era husband, I'm not asking you to do my job. I'll do my job, and I'll do this other job, because that sort of keeps the peace until you resent it too much, and then you say, arrivederci. But you don't cook a 3-course meal. You stop by and you grab a rotisserie chicken on your way home. Or you eat out a lot at Fuddruckers. Or you learn that McDonald's wasn't terrible. That if you look at kids around, they were 6 feet tall and they were eating McDonald's. You weren't going to die from it. And there is nothing wrong with SpaghettiOs for breakfast.
Shortly after, I know, your first marriage ended, you met Jerry, your current husband. Tell me how you guys met, because he's also an attorney.
He did. We met at a bar.
Really?
That's how we met. We met at a bar. It was a Friday night. It was after work. He was at the bar, and he was, holding court and talking about a recent win that he had had. And I came in to see a colleague of mine to tell them that I really couldn't come in and spend, an hour or so with them because my mother was up in the house with the kids and I really had to get home. And I saw him across the room. A, he was cute. B, he had highly polished shoes. I said, oh my goodness, adorable, and he cares about his shoes. Two things that I found very, very intoxicating. So I went up
Good to know.
I went up to him and I said, and who is that? And he said to me, lady, get your finger out of my face. I married him and then I found out that the shoes were patent leather. True story.
Really?
Yes.
That's so funny. Now, at this point in your career, you're prosecuting domestic violence cases and child abuse cases, and you're getting a lot of attention because of your success, and I think because of your style. And you actually caught the attention of Ed Koch. And I know that meeting Ed Koch really changed the course of your career. Tell us about that transition.
Well, Alan Schwartz was Ed Koch's law partner. And Alan Schwartz had agreed to take on the responsibility of being the corporation counsel of the city of New York during Ed Koch's first term. And Alan was probably one of the most honest, honorable, brilliant lawyers that I ever met. When he came to the law department, it was several hundred people in the law department, and most of those people were dead wood. They had been there forever. They didn't know if they were a foot of horseback. Everything was sort of signed off. It was an awful system. And Alan said to Ed, the only way I can revamp this system is if I have the ability to hire and fire. And that was a big thing back then because all of these people were civil servants. He said, you can't do that. But Ed Koch said, if that's what it's going to take to bring excellence to the City of New York Law Department, that's what we're going to do. And if those of you who remember Ed Koch knew that Ed Koch, if he said it, he meant it, and the city was his passion and politics was his passion. He was a gutsy guy. He had no family. New York City was his family. He was just an honest guy. So I was introduced to Ed by Alan Schwartz. And before Alan left after he had completed his promised 4 years, he said to me, and he said to Ed, I would like you to consider her for the family court. And the city could be the beneficiary of some of that spice. And Ed, to his credit, believed in the merit appointment of judges, took politics out of the appointment of judges in New York City during his first term. And so I got a chance, despite the fact that I was not a member of a political party, I was not a registered anything. So to me, his was an affirmation of the fact that if you do the right thing usually happens, not always. But if you do the wrong thing, it's going to catch up with you. But if you do the right thing and are honest within yourself, as he was, I took a lesson away from that. So, and if you tell the truth, you don't have to have a good memory.
Yeah. I know every day as a family court judge, you must have heard such sad, depressing stories of families falling apart, parents abusing their children. And I just wonder, what kind of impact did that have on you, and how difficult were those cases to hear day in and day out?
I love the family court. Now, it's not that I love misery. It's just that I thought that I had found my home. I was not a math scholar. Science was not my strong suit. But I understand what motivates people. And I understand social interaction. And that's really what family court was all about, with the exception of the criminal stuff. I found that work easy for me, while it was challenging because most of the time you were unsuccessful. It's the kind of work that you do. You feel as if you put in 100% of your energy, you're going to get a great product at the end. Well, not when you're dealing with human beings, because you're dealing with people who have frailties, and the people who come into the family court are falling apart usually. Anyway, their families are falling apart, their own lives are falling apart, and then you're trying to work hard and make it all great. Well, it doesn't happen. So my recipe for myself and keeping myself pretty sane was cleaning bathrooms. It's interesting. It was cleaning bathrooms. I would go home after a long day of work, totally exhausted, having felt as if I was emotionally and physically spent, most of the time with an unsatisfying result. But I knew if I went home and scrubbed my bathroom, at the end of that 40 minutes, I was going to have a clean bathroom. So you worked hard, and you saw at the end of that 40 minutes something good. So that was, and it got out a lot of aggression anyway, and I ended up with a clean bathroom.
That's so interesting. I'm going to have to try that, or not. You know, do you think that some of the style we see, this sort of hilarious, quick-witted, snappy style, was that developed as a judge in family court, or not so much? Because I'm sure those were very different circumstances.
No, I don't think so. I think that the fast pace was. But the problems that are faced with the people in family court are so different from the problems that you see in the television courtroom. Some of the problems are really kind of comical. And as I'm getting older, I make my own comedy. Actually, I'm going to tell you a story.
Okay.
As I'm getting older, my hearing is not as acute as it used to be. So I had 3 young kids, and the crew understands that, and sometimes I say, "What? Speak up," you know, the usual stuff. But I had 3 rednecks from Alabama, young kids. And the pivotal point of the case is what these kids were doing out trolling around at midnight. And in a thick Southern accent, I asked the question. I said, why don't you tell me, guys, what were you doing out at midnight? So one of them, who's the smart aleck, he said to me, we were on our way to Kmart to get matzahs. So I leaned over to my sidekick Bird, and I said, does he think I'm stupid? You think that I said, you really think that believe that you 3 no-goodnicks, my grandfather would call them pasconyaks, you 3 no-goodnicks were on your way to Kmart to get matzahs? And Bird leaned over to me and he said, monsters. You know what monsters are? Monsters, for those of you who don't know what they are a drink like Red Bull, an energy drink like Red Bull.
That's so funny. Thought he was sucking up to you.
Monsters.
Let me ask you, you know, we mentioned Jerry, and then we're going to get into the TV show and things like that, but you know.
Jerry doesn't mind when you stick on him.
Okay. He's so great, by the way. I don't know if Jerry's backstage or in the audience,
he knows he's
but
great.
He's wonderful. And you know, I know it's interesting just because I think it's fairly unusual. You all were married for quite a while. I know you were deeply affected by your dad's death. He died when he was 70, I guess, in 1990. And I know it was very hard, and you all divorced that year.
Mm-hmm. We did.
And then you remarried a year later. Did you all know that? Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Sorry.
they all know
okay,
that.
fine. Anyway, what was that about?
I don't know what it was about, but the best punchline is, I dated a little bit during that year. All right, hold your ears, Jerry. And then I figured out they were all the same. Mine had hair.
So what did you learn?
Actually, I have to expand on that because he's going to say, all right, you made a joke. Now get to the reality of it. The reality of it is we were better as a team than we were separately. And we both came to understand that. Ready for another story?
Yeah.
During that year, Jerry dated a bit, and I dated a bit. It was probably a lot easier for him because, you know, I'm a little bossy if you haven't noticed.
Nah.
And I remember a guy came to pick me up at my apartment, and we were going across 34th Street down to a restaurant between 2nd and 3rd on 34th Street. And first, I sort of helped him across the street because he wasn't moving fast enough. And he was a little overweight. Not much, but a little overweight. He sat down, and we ordered, you know, he brought us menus, started to order dinner. He said, I'd like, and he ordered something like, I don't know, the equivalent of fried chicken and and with potatoes and gravy, whatever it was. But it was, so I said, and the waiter looked at me, and I said, that's what he'd like. Let me tell you what he's going to have.
Was this a first date?
First date.
Something tells me there
First and last.
There was no second date, needless to say.
First and last. First and last. Oh, sorry.
No,
As
I
you're
love these stories.
As you're
Please,
talking, I'm just
No,
free flow thinking.
It's great. It's great, but did you guys change anything? You know, because I'm interested in this. Did you change the way you treated each other or behaved towards each other? In other words, what did you learn by having a year off? Obviously, you were better as a team, but did you bring something new to your marriage that wasn't there before?
I wish I could say yes. I wish for this entire audience I could say yes, we had a better understanding of our respective roles and how we're going to impact on each other. I wish we could say that. The truth is, Jerry and I have a chemistry, and we have a mojo. We do.
Yeah.
And he's infuriating. I'm sure he thinks I am. And I have lots of complaints and gripes and everything else. But we've been together almost 40 years, and when he walks into a room, I still like to look at him. Isn't that correct? That's the answer. That's the honest answer.
That's such a cute picture. Where is that?
That looks like Monaco. That looks like the other part of Monaco, not the big, anyway, it's Monaco.
Let me ask you about the TV show, because you spent about 25 years working in the court system, and then one day you were 50. Your entire life changed. I know you were profiled on 60 Minutes, because Judy's been on my show, and we've talked about a lot of things. And someone saw the piece and approached you and said, hey, would you like to do this show? Tell us how that all happened.
A couple of years after 60 Minutes, as a matter of fact, the People's Court was going off the air, and they had two of the producers, you know, the segment producers, were now out of a job, and they had seen the 60 Minutes piece. So they called, and I was sitting in chambers in Manhattan, and said, did you ever think of doing what you do on television? Well, of course I thought I had, because I saw Joe Wapner, and as nice a man as he is, I could do that, you know, with one hand tied behind my back.
I like Judge Wapner.
And they said, well, we'll see if we can get some people to look at your tape. Could you come out to California? And I was a civil servant at the time, so I had enough money extra to go out there for 4 days. That included the 2 traveling days, so it actually gave me 2 days there. And I went to a very economical hotel, and we went around to 2 or 3 people, and we went to big ticket television, Larry Little, and I walked in, and Larry is probably 5 or 6 years my junior. And I walked in, and he said, oh, you remind me of my mother. Wrong thing to say. Wrong. However, he did say, if you sign on this dotted line, I will do a pilot, which he did. And believe it or not, got sold. And we were on the worst time periods, on the worst stations that first year. And it was like a New York roach. We couldn't be killed. There are more people are Judy fans than are Judy foes. The Judy foes are really foes. You know, they don't like the style, and sadly, they're the ones that, you know, write on the internet. You know, you scroll down when I have nothing to do. I scroll down some of the comments. I say, my God, I didn't know you could be such a hater. But more people like me, more people like you than not, but the people that have the time to spend with all that negative energy are usually the people that don't work.
Right. Right, it's true.
So there you go, writing
It's
nasty
true.
things. Get a life.
Yeah, they usually are resentful or really
just
full
haters.
of self-loathing,
Yeah.
I think. Anyway, all right. So were you nervous about doing television because you do seem like such a natural? Was it? I mean, do you feel like you grew into it, or was it something that just clicked right away?
Clicked right away.
Really?
Clicked right away. I had no fear. Especially since it was taped. I had no fear. This is live, so this is different. But I really had no fear. If, you know, don't ask me if you load the donkey up with 6 loads of grain in Tijuana and it drops a half a load of grain in Texas and then it goes to Cincinnati. When it gets to New York, how much grain is left? I can't answer that question. You know, and that's what's on all the standardized tests. So I did not do well in those. But television is a snap.
You know, I mean, it's wonderful that this happened to you, too, when you were 50, at a time where a lot of women
Actually, you're so kind. I was 52.
Okay, at 52. And so you really were able to reinvent yourself in such an exciting way. And I think a lot of women get to be that age, or sometimes even younger, and really don't know which direction they want their lives to go in. What would you tell people who, obviously they may not be given their own television show or given the opportunities that you were, but as a way of moving forward and really enjoying every chapter of their lives?
I think the first thing you have to do, and we should teach our children that right from the very beginning of their lives, is find something that you're naturally adept at and then figure out how to make a living at it. Because so many people, you know, are pushed one way or another by, you know, well-meaning but misguided parents or relatives or circumstances, and they end up doing something that they're not comfortable doing, and they're not comfortable doing it 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. So it's a drudge, and they usually don't do it well. So first, find something that you're naturally adept at. And for women, you have to know that you define yourself. So if you find something that you're good at, you may have to take a job to put food on the table, but always keep that little extra space over here to reach beyond for that dream. Because, listen, I'm not somebody, it's not my business, nor to say everybody can realize their dream. I don't necessarily believe that. And I wouldn't try to fool people by saying, you know, the world is your oyster and you can all be successful, because it's just not so. But we can all, everyone, if you love to teach children, be a great teacher. You'll love it. And if you can't get a job teaching, volunteer someplace where you have that gift of interact. I don't know, it just seems to me that people limit themselves, and men and women. Men, because very often they are forced, they feel as if they have to be the provider, so very early on, then they have that male stuff anyway that gets them into the workplace and says, I have to get to claw my way to the top. Women usually don't have that. And then as a woman, I think that you have to know what your worth is. And you define your own worth. And making yourself indispensable in whatever job it is. You know, I know people in the medical field, doctors, who closed their practices 5 years early because their secretary retired. The woman who kept their office and made their appointments, because that person had become so indispensable. The gal who does my makeup, Nancy Cassette, made herself indispensable to me, not because she does my makeup beautifully, because I do my own makeup when I'm here. Lots of people can do your makeup. But she has a great spirit. So when she comes in the morning, she sets the momentum of the day moving forward. She sets the tone in that dressing room. So she's become indispensable for me. And that's where women make a mistake, when they let somebody else define who they are rather than making themselves indispensable by doing the best job that they possibly can. And I think you can do that at any age.
Yeah. So let's talk about the show, because it debuted in September of 1996.
Same day, September 16th, yesterday.
Oh, really?
September 16, 1996.
Happy anniversary. And obviously, it's going gangbusters. The ratings are high. You signed on till 2017 to continue doing the show.
I did.
Judy is, I know it's tacky. My parents always taught me not to discuss money, but I can't help it, because you make $47 million a year, sister.
I never talk about money.
Which is insane and wonderful, by the way. But what do you think? Why? There you go. Someone's happy for you out there, Judy.
Can I?
Yeah.
I'm going to interject for 1 second, because I very rarely get involved with the issue of money, because I think, as my parents told me the same thing, it's tacky. However, the people the haters, when they talk about,
Right.
how you make so much money. Well, truth is, I work for a company. I work for CBS. And it's a very good company and a very successful company. And they have employees, and they pay employees. Some they have to pay, people put the lights on and that sort of stuff, but they pay their on-air talent consistent with what they produce. So CBS wouldn't pay me whatever they're paying me if I didn't make them a hell of a lot of money.
That's right.
And so the question is, if I didn't take it, and if CBS said to me, Judy, we will donate in your name half of your salary to the charity of your choice, if you do it. But they don't, they will not. What they do is they take more of the pot. And as it should be at the very beginning of the program, the company, and it wasn't CBS at the time, made a lot more than I did. And then, getting back to our old question, the question of defining yourself and what your worth is, as I've worked over the years, I said, I'm worth more than that. And we are going to become partners, because while the Judge Judy program, and believe me, I'm really happy with CBS, and I love you. But I can do my program without you. You can't do my program without me. That is not a lack of humility. That's just true. So those folks who say, what, that's really an awful lot of dough. Well, CBS is 55. That's what it's trading at. It was trading at the last time I looked. That means that their stockholders, their shareholders, are doing a lot better off. I was a genius who sold it at 8. I can tell you. So everybody's happy.
Right.
And if the company wasn't happy, they would say toodaloo. And if I wasn't happy, I'd say toodaloo. Right now we have a beautiful, blissful marriage. I hope it continues for many years.
Do you think that you'll go beyond 2017?
I don't know. It depends upon how the face holds up.
So why do you think, people love you, obviously. I think it's pretty clear why. But why do you think people love the show? What is it about it's that, again, is you and your repartee and the things that you say to people. But what is it about sort of the format and the situations?
It's the message. It's the message.
And what is that message, you think?
Do the right thing, take responsibility for your own actions. If you don't act like a fool, I'm going to call you out on it. If you're a bad guy, usually because we are indulged in this country in a PC mentality, so people are afraid to say things that I have no fear of saying. You know, I think if you're 21 years old and have 5 children from 5 different men and don't work, I can say to you, you have enough children. Shamelessly, without fear. Now, if somebody else said that, how dare you? You know, you're being so judgmental. You're absolutely right.
That's why you're a
You're
judge.
absolutely right. That's my job. But you know, when I hear the machinations and ruminations of people who spend so much time figuring out how to scam and how to manipulate rather than honing and diverting their attention into something more substantive that would be creative and make them stand on their own 2 feet, it's irritating, especially when we are supporting that irresponsible lifestyle. So, and I don't mind saying it.
Do you think that, I think a lot of people...
That's the message.
I think a lot of people love watching you because you say the things they want to say and that they're not necessarily able to say.
Are afraid to say.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. Yeah, that's
What
unfortunate.
conclusions have you drawn? I'm just curious because you see all these people from all walks of life in different situations. What conclusions have you drawn about human nature in the course of doing your show? I mean, are you optimistic about people or pessimistic about people?
Morley Safer said to me in that first 60 Minutes interview in, I think, 1992, are you optimistic about the family court? How do you think it's going? And I said, it's going to get worse, a lot worse. So if you think today about how much better we were either in 1992 or in 2013, what do you think? I think that certainly public education hasn't gotten any better. I think that there are a lot more people living in poverty. I think that our government the perception of our government is not what it was 25 years ago. So I don't necessarily think that things are getting better. I think that if more people felt comfortable in being honest about the way they feel and perceive their role in the community and what they demand from government and the responsibility that they demand from their citizens, we would all be better off. But because the PC police are constantly vigilant, whether in the workplace or in social places, it frightens people. And me, I don't care. I say whatever I please and feel very comfortable about saying it, and if you don't like it, you have a choice. Turn it off. And if you want to watch it and spit at the TV, you're free to do that too. Your Nielsen number is the same.
I know that you've won a lot of awards through the years, but you're sort of the Susan Lucci of judge shows. At least you were for a while, Judy, because you were nominated 14 times. But guess what? You finally won an Emmy. And it's been a long time coming. That wasn't annoying. Such a stupid little. But anyway. So was that meaningful for you, or did you think, whatever?
Do you want the PC answer or you want the
No,
reality?
I want the
of
Judge
it?
Judy answer.
It's like The Last Man Standing. The only show that's still on the air, the court shows have come and gone, and every one of them, the ones that were canceled, all won Emmys. I have been the #1 court program, not daytime syndication, but just court for 688 sweeps periods. Phenomenal. So, because you have, in my judgment, you're never going to give me another Emmy, so I don't care. I have it, and I enjoy looking at it. But one has to say to themselves, and this is really not sour grapes, because there are so many wonderful TV programs. We say, how come they get an Emmy? Nobody watches them. I mean, if you think about it, I'm having a baby or whatever it is, that one, it's not here anymore. That beat me one year. So did the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, the year that they killed somebody.
Oh.
That's true.
I think I was the host that year.
You remember? There you go.
I am so sorry.
Sorry, I forgive
am so
you.
Sorry.
I forgive you.
And I have to say, we did not deserve it.
So you have to say, somebody in that little group didn't like you.
Yeah.
And if that's what award ceremonies come down to, 2 or 3 people in a world where you have 9 million eyeballs watching you every day, 2 or 3 people say, we don't like her, and we don't like that she's so outspoken, we don't like the fact that, I don't know, she talks down to people who make too many children, and questions governmental responsibility. We don't like that, so we're not going to give her an Emmy. And if that's the award, I'm really glad I got it once.
And that's enough.
And that's enough.
I know that in your spare time, you're also a very successful author with some very funny books out with funny names, some of which we saw in that little tape. But you have a new book out. Actually, I talked to Judy about this book on my show, What Would Judy Say? A Grown-Up Guide to Living Together with Benefits. Anything I need to know about that?
Compromise, and it's overrated. Compromise is overrated, is what I mean, not living together. Living together is great. The benefits part is even better.
Although you had some negative things to say about young people. I thought it was really interesting who live together these days, oftentimes really out of financial convenience. Mm-hmm. Or, it's too difficult. And then they move into marriage, and you say that's a pretty lousy way to make a lifelong commitment because you don't want to move out of the apartment and move your couch somewhere else, right?
Well,
but you were saying how a lot of kids today, you feel, get themselves entangled in those situations.
Well, they get themselves into entanglements financially before they're ready to commit legally. Oh, I love you so much, let's buy a puppy together. Oh, I love you, let's buy a timeshare together. Oh, I love you, we're going to buy a house together. Oh, I love you, let me co-sign for a car for you. Well, 6 months later, this is over, the bloom is off the rose, everybody's watching where the knives are in the kitchen, and you're still stuck with the car loan. What are you gonna do with the damn dog, And I have 2 dogs, dog haters, not me, and so I don't want to see any of those emails. Why don't you call him a damn dog? But somebody's going to get stuck with a mortgage payment, and now that you're no longer together, the co-signer on the car, he's driving around with some other girl, and I'm paying, and I'm a co-signer on that car. Well, don't get yourself entangled with somebody financially. I think it's a good idea to keep that sort of separate anyway for a long time until you're really comfortable. But certainly not when you're living together and you haven't prepared to make a commitment to be committed.
I think that book was really interesting, had some great advice. You also have a website, whatwouldjudysay.com. You post short videos on a variety of subjects, like you did one for kids on first impressions and how important they can be. You also did one on something called grief-driven litigation. Can you tell us about that? Because I think some people in our audience might be able to relate to that.
Anger is an easy emotion to deal with, and substitute it for grief, sorrow, loss, whatever the emotions are that are hard to deal with. Anger is an easier one, so that when you lose a loved one, your father remarries, and he married for a short period of time, and all of a sudden, he passes away, and his wife has your mother's lollik bowl. And you want that lollik bowl back. Wife says, it's my lollik bowl. My husband brought it to my house. I said, I remember when they got that. It was for the 35th wedding anniversary. Now, was the loss that you're dealing with, that you sort of don't want to come to terms with, it's easier to go to sleep at night not feeling the loss of a parent, a spouse, a sibling, But that anger is so much easier. I'm going to get that bowl. If it's the last thing I do and machinate and ruminate about getting that bowl. And I have to tell you something. It's a very hard emotion to get rid of. And I want to tell you what a loving brother I have. For my 70th birthday, he bought me the lolly bowl.
He did? That is so funny. I think you're right about anger and grief. We have some questions from the audience that I want to get to, even though I have a million that I haven't asked you yet. But so someone asked, the U.S. Supreme Court, did you ever want to join the court?
Oh, absolutely not. I am not big on rule by committee. I think that...
What a shock.
I think that even government service is the same. Even being, look at our poor president. You know, he really thought it was going to be such a piece of cake. He was in office for 3 years. He's white. He looks like he's aged 25 years. And he said, why did I want this so badly? When you know, the mayor of the city of New York, I mean, we've had some great mayors. We've had mayors, right? Nobody wants to run for office anymore. People, they know it's nothing but aggravation. You really can't make a difference because there are so many checks and balances and yings and yangs. So, you know, I mean, I'm not saying go out there and get a TV show, but for me, the Supreme Court or any appellate court where there were more than one person, I don't even like jury trials. So what? Actually, it's the reason I like family court. We didn't have jury trials. Jerry's biggest frustrations in the Supreme Court were when he sat in the Bronx, and he would come home and would say, I don't understand it. They just acquitted that guy. The cops found him in the apartment with a bag, including, you know, the television and the jewelry and the silverware, and it was on the 3rd floor, and he said, and the guy said to the jury, took the stand and said, I had to use a restroom. So there's a certain frustration when you deal with 12 people who come with a perspective or 6 people who come with a perspective when you sit in family court. So I actually would consider government if they created a matriarchy in this country.
What is the best advice you ever got?
Well, the old standby, you only have one chance to make a first impression. And if you do the right thing happens. And of course, my father had a couple of dirty stories about that, which we're going to skip here because it's live stream, I understand, to lots of states and cities in this country.
Good idea. Did you ever regret, someone wants to know, did you ever regret a ruling where perhaps you found out more information and realized in retrospect you were wrong? I tried to give every case that I did 100% of my pure energy, unfettered and unencumbered by politics or whether I liked you or whether I didn't like you, but just tried to give it 100%. And I said to myself a long time ago, if you start second-guessing yourself, this is not a job for you. That's why, you know, people watch the program and they say, why can't other courts run like that? And it's because all too often judges don't forget that their first responsibility is to judge. That is to make a decision. And once you've made that decision, driven nothing by your good intentions, facts, you can't look back. What's your opinion of the judge's decision, having said that, on the stop and frisk policy of the NYPD? Ooh.
Well,
everyone likes that question. They're like, ooh.
I think that New York City is a safer place now than it was 25 years ago. And I think we've had some fabulous police commissioners who were guided solely on keeping the city safe. I don't know if you remember, but I remember there was a time when you didn't go to the theater because you were afraid. And I was trying cases in the family court with wilding, kids just for no reason, knocking over fruit stands and going into a grocery store and knocking everything off the shelves. And things have changed. And I think that they've changed for the better. I think that New York is a safer place to live. I think it's a safer place to let kids go out in the street, safer place to go to school, safer place, school I'm not so sure about, but generally safer. Now, does that mean that I don't appreciate the fact that some people believe that the police approach to stop and frisk has to do with racial profiling? Absolutely. And probably in a way it does. But if you stop to realize that most of the crime is in a certain ethnic community, well, who are you going to stop and frisk? You know, me? You're not going to stop and frisk me because that's not where the police concentration is. And if the police weren't there policing, there would be outcries that they're not policing in the communities that have the highest crime rate. So I think that there has to be a balance, but I certainly do not believe in hampering reasonable police work, because that's what I think the primary purpose of government is. The primary purpose of government is to protect its citizens so that we feel safe. Because if you had a choice, Katie Couric, and I guarantee you every person in this audience, if they had a choice between, I don't know, seeing to it that the roads were repaved or that some other benefit of being a citizen of this country were taken away, and feeling threatened in your own home, I think that everybody out there would say, you know what, I want to feel safe in my own house. You know, and I am committed to that sense. Doesn't mean that I think that there has to be a reasonable balance. And I think that there has to be a balance, but I think safety in the community, it has to be the paramount responsibility of government.
Another question is, I'm in the process of applying to law school. If I get accepted, what advice can you give me? This is from Tony S.
Is Tony with a Y or an I?
I think it's with a Y.
I don't
Where
know.
are you, Tony S?
Tony, get through the first year. If you get through the first year, the second and third year, a piece of cake.
And what about becoming a lawyer? Would you recommend people become lawyers today?
Only if they can't get into business school.
Well, I could sit here all night, but Judy has some engagement. So, Judge Judy, thank you so much.